Here's my South Bend lathe, and before I get into the tutorial, I want to get a shot of the upgrades. There's a 2-horse motor, and of course the chuck, and belt arrangements close to being original. You should always try to keep your lathe in good, clean operating condition. Doesn't hurt to put a coat of paint on it. It's not that difficult. Just set a little bit of time aside and do it. Make sure that all your gears are always lubricated and you keep them as clean as possible. It's a good looking lathe. Here's how the 2-horse motor was fitted in here, and I still used a lot of the original switches, and it still bolts up the same as the original motor. And everything's pretty clean. Take 2. I'm about to begin another project of a continuous repair of my South Bend lathe. This, of course, everyone that's familiar with these lathes, this is what's called a Light 10. Model A. It's a Model A basically, and this is made in about the mid-1950s. When I first purchased this lathe, I was really, I could have started out by buying a brand new lathe, and there's some pros and cons on a new lathe. When you start, everything's pretty much straight and perfect. A lot of things about buying an older lathe is you learn a lot about them while you're trying to fixing them up. And of course, yes, I do have quite a bit of money in this lathe that to do it over again, I would do exactly what I'm doing now. But for some people, it may be the best thing to do is to buy a brand new lathe for the money and get started that way. But I'm very fond of this old machinery, and yeah, I like to conjure things back, and yes, they do have their problems. When I got it, yeah, it came with a 1/2-horse motor, which is not very strong. There were materials that I want to be able to cut, like stainless steel. You have to take a fairly deep cut in order to get a very smooth finish. It's kind of tricky. Same with aluminum. You have to take a pretty good cut. So this called that I did have to finally research and find a belt that was stronger. Plus, I needed more horsepower. So I replaced with a 2-horse motor. Got a little more power in it. Replaced my bushings up top there in the drive. I had to learn how to do that, and plus I put in drip oilers to give it a little more oil. And one thing about a lathe, and this is my own thoughts on it, that you should always keep it as clean as you can. Doesn't matter how old it is. Maybe it doesn't look very good. It's rusty, but it should be dripping with oil, and it should keep it as clean as possible. And on an everyday basis. Every time you use this lathe, clean it up. Now, the original Cushman chuck was heavily worn, and I couldn't keep what do they call it, parallelism, whatever. It's keeping things parallel on your cut. And I had some trouble with that, so I fitted. It's not the best chuck out there. What I could afford is Chinese manufacturer, but I was able to learn how to fit it, and it does good enough work for the girls I go with. And I cannot tell on measuring when I was doing the run out on it, I cannot find any deviation. It's supposed to be within 0.003, but it's closer than that. But I can't find it. I've got it pretty good. And the owner before me had gotten these bushings inside the head quite accurate, so they're tightened up. So, and because he thought that was important, so he did that work for me. I do have plans to replace the bearings in here, and up in here I do have one of the bull gear has a tooth knocked out, and I've got another bull gear for that. So when I do that, all that other work, I'm going to replace that gear. I will probably take this gear, and I do have, for my milling machine, I do have a gear cutting tool for it to cut that. So I'll weld it up with the TIG welder, and I'll recut that. And then I'll probably pass it on to somebody else that has a bunch of teeth knocked out of their bull gear. On here, I've done as much work as I can, keeping it very clean. Kind of trying out one of these inexpensive holders. They're quick holders, and I've got them on the other lathe. A lot bigger than this one, but this is a small lathe. It's really a small lathe. In its day, it was the mini lathe to have. It's one of, well, there was some smaller. They had some great Craftsman lathes, but this one is an excellent lathe, and on top of it, you can also do some serious machining with it too. So I have, of course, my drive plates. I've got a collection of these, and I have a fairly good face plate for it that I sandwiched on a piece of aluminum so I can drill holes in it and mount things, and it's expandable. But I do also have a chuck, a 4-jaw chuck, with they're all independent, so I can hold out of center a piece. Now, one of the biggest problems, and this is really makes an owner of one of these lathes pretty sad, is that your ways eventually get worn, or you can only do so much to work with these. And when you're cutting any length, so like you're making an arbor, it makes it a little difficult to do that cut. You have to keep continuously readjusting to keep that parallel, and to make sure your cuts are nice. And I've had a suggestion given to me by a guy on eBay. He claims to have done it once before, where you use Tex, a marine grade epoxy, and fill it up along here, and then shave it off and bring the lathe back into trim, so you can use it at least for a short term. If it keeps the lathe accurately cutting for a couple of years, that's a good thing. You'll do a lot of work in 2 years. But until I come up with a solution to grinding these, and I'm working on it, going to cast and experiment with the use of a pretty good router and some stones to set up a carriage to run on here and actually regrind it, because to get it closer to its original specs. To send these off to have them reground is very expensive. A guy would have to have more money than sense to do that. So we have to do a workaround. Us people that are working class people, we need quick fixes sometimes till we can figure out how to regrind these. And I'm working on that, and eventually I'll share that with everybody on how to set up a way grinder. And actually, so all your other friends that have a South Bend lathe, they can borrow it and get their lathes back into trim too. But I've tried to upgrade this as much as I can. I do have quite a bit of wear here, and I've got wear over on here that I need to address, and plus on part over here there's some wear. And here's the hot dog lick. This is the idea I'm going to try. Over here, this is a straight edge, more closer to a true straight. These can be very expensive. A lot of them are, you know, if you get one that's out of Russia or Poland, they're pretty good stuff. They are priced. They do a good job on these straights, on these true straights. But this is an aluminum one, so you do have to. You kind of have to wear gloves when you actually use these, so you don't make them warp from the heat in your hands. And it's only got one side that's straight right here. And this is within 3/1000ths over the distance of 58 inches. And this is 38 inches long, so it's close enough for the girls I go with. And what the plan is to remove all of the carriage, take that clean off, and take it off from our drive. And you can see that I also have some plans. I've got to upgrade my crossfeed and my compound. I'm going to do a little work on those. Maybe I can find some other Acme threaded, but at this time it's plenty good for what it does here. There is some backlash, but I'll take out some of the backlash and get it closer. And the idea is to take and coat this with, take some butcher's paper, wax paper, and take and have this nice and clean, and fold it over this edge and tape it back so it's on there nice and straight with no ripples. Butcher's paper is a consistent thickness. It's very, very good quality. So when it goes on here, it'll keep epoxy from sticking on it. Now the idea, here's the grandiose idea, is to take and coat this way where the depression is with the epoxy, and then take and push this up onto the way where it's not worn, up here where the hand flaking is. That was original factory hand flaking to make sure that it would hold oil. And then you just press it on where it's the least worn, and just gently squeeze on there to get a consistent pressing, so it's going to be nice and straight. And then whatever oozes out, you just take and scrape off, and it's highly sandable. And then you let it cure up, and that gives you a fairly good durable surface. Once you oil it, there might be some other tricks, maybe putting some Teflon pads in there, but you still get it closer so it's going to be more accurate for at least a couple of years at the very least, until I can figure out a way to regrind these and then bring it right back up to spec. There are some concepts where you could take and grind off the ways and actually put a rail in here, but I haven't seen anybody doing that yet. I've heard a lot of people talk about it, but I don't have access to that type of machinery to be able my milling machine will not cut something that long. So maybe I can figure out how to get somebody else to cut me one, and I can actually bolt it back on and have brand new ways for a fraction of the cost of having these reground. Maybe I'll experiment with a used one. Maybe I'll find one on eBay that somebody's selling. I'll buy it and regrind it first, and really mess that one up real good instead of messing up this one. Or if I'm successful, I should be able to restore that one too. It was just to be able to couple and hold like something like a Makita plunge router, and make up my own grinding stones and take and shape this lathe, these ways back to their original shape. I'd be grinding them down more on the ends that are new and lightly coming across these here until I've got it all consistent. And then I probably will do some hand flaking on it to make sure that it holds oil. But in the meantime, we're just interested in getting this lathe so it's functional for a couple of years. Who knows? So many times something that's temporary becomes more permanent. But I got this idea from a fellow eBayer that said he had done it before on a number on Logan lathe, and it was successful, and it put the lathe back up. So it's worth a try. If you really mess it up, you can just it's just easy to heat it up with a propane torch and scrape it off with something like a little bit of brass scraper or something, copper, and at least you won't get further behind on the accuracy. And you can start over, clean it up, and start over again with epoxying it. Maybe if it takes you several times, but if you get one time right and it works, and you can get the lathe back to its original, because the distance here from here to here is enough that even if you have a very slight deviation of a couple of thousandths, you're closer than what you were, because how it sits on there, it doesn't follow that belly in there. So that's the idea. So this is going to be a much longer presentation, but always try to improve your lathe. Always make it better. I've got a lot of the original tooling came with this lathe, and you always try to accumulate as many tools as you can. There's another shot of it here, the motor. But you can still get in trouble with this lathe. Lathes can catch your clothing. You always have to be safe around these lathes, no matter what size, whether they're a mini lathe or an intermediate size or a big lathe. You should always be careful. They can hurt you or even kill you.